Hello there, thrill seekers. That was a little bit of the song "Working Man" by Rush from their first album with their original drummer. What was his name? John Rutsey. Yeah, before they got Neil Peart in there. And that song was chosen by me, weird grammar, because someone asked me to talk about work as in Zen, like yeah, he was kind of vague about it, but I thought about it, and there are a lot of things I can say about work and Zen. So let's just jump into it, as the YouTubers say. So if you ever go to a Zen retreat, if you've ever been to a Zen retreat, if you're ever going to go to a Zen retreat, of which I'm doing a few this year, so I'm going to announce those at the end of this video. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I'm doing retreats in Finland, Germany, and England in September, so I'll have those at the end of the video. If you go to one of those retreats, or to pretty much, I would say, any Zen retreat in the Rinzai or the Soto tradition, you will be asked to participate in something that's usually called Samu. And Samu is kind of a technical term used to mean work as Buddhist practice. The San Francisco Zen Center, they have the same sort of work period, but they call it soji there, and I don't really know why, because soji is just a kind of common Japanese word for housework or yard work, kind of general work around your dwelling space. So I don't know why they use that word, but anyway, usually called Samu. And in a Samu period, so normally at a Zen retreat, you're doing between, let's say, 4 and maybe 10 or 15 hours of Zazen per day. Nishijima Roshi liked to keep his retreats to about 5 hours of Zazen a day, which is kind of what I do, but some of the more brutal ones, or the more intensive ones, will do 10 or more hours of Zazen. But these are broken up with other things. And of course you have meals, which are taken in a kind of ritualized fashion, in which you do a bunch of chanting and stuff before you actually have the meal, and then you're sort of trying to carry on the Zazen as you're doing the meal. And the other thing that you do, or one of the other things that you'll often do, is Samu. So Samu is the work period, and generally the work period at a retreat, at least the ones I host and pretty much anyone I've ever been to, the Samu period is usually once a day, and it's usually about as long as the Zazen period. So if you're doing 40 minutes of Zazen, mostly, you're going to do 40 minutes of Samu. I don't know how they do it in the Rinzai tradition, since they do about 25 minutes of Zazen most rounds, and I assume 25 is probably a little bit too short for a Samu period. Samu period. So generally speaking, when you do Samu, the group gathers together and has jobs assigned to them. And the jobs are generally not that difficult. It's like basic cleaning. I often volunteered to do the bathrooms when we were at the seshins, the Zen retreats that my teacher Nishijima Roshi would hold in Japan, because I knew what I was doing there. It wasn't necessarily the best job, but at least I knew how to clean a bathroom, and I didn't like getting assigned things where I didn't know what I was doing. Sometimes you'll be sweeping. Often, you know, if there's a Zen garden or something out there, they want to get the leaves out of it, that kind of thing. One of the big jobs, one of the jobs that people always wanted to get at the retreats that we did at Tokei Temple in Shizuoka, Japan, was cleaning the bathrooms. And when I think I just said bathrooms before, bathrooms as distinguished from toilets, because in Japan, generally speaking, the toilet is not in the bathroom. Unless you're in a really small, like a one-bedroom apartment, they might combine them. But Japanese people generally find it kind of disgusting to put a toilet and a bath in the same room, which I grew to find disgusting myself, but now I just have to live with it. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. At Tokei, they had a big, I wouldn't call it a fancy bathroom, like the room with the bath in it, but it was a nice bathroom, like a public bathroom. Yeah, not really a public bathroom, because that would mean anybody could go in, but several monks at a time could sit in the tub if they wanted to, and that's what we did. We would have the bath time where all the men would go into the tub for one period, and all the women would go in the other. Usually the women got to have it first. Anyway, people always liked cleaning the bathrooms because, I don't know, some kind of a thrill out of that. Now, when you do Samu, the basic idea of Samu is that you're working for the period that you are assigned to work. So, whether it's gardening, whether it's cleaning toilets or bathrooms, sometimes they'll have you doing food prep, various sort of minor jobs. You do the job until the period ends, and you don't necessarily try to complete the task. Having said that, this is the way I used to always describe it when I would do my retreats, until one retreat where I was doing it at Mount Baldy, which is somewhere back there. I was doing that retreat there, and my cabin was down at the bottom of a steep hill, which led up to where all the real action was. The dining rooms and the zendo and all that stuff was up at the top of the hill. And one day I came up the little path and found my path was completely blocked by a giant pile of leaves and sticks and things, because somebody had taken my instructions way too literally and just kind of run away from the job as soon as the little bell rang. Somebody usually comes around and rings a bell to tell you that the work period has ended. And so I had to say, well, you don't have to necessarily complete the job, but at least straighten things up before you leave, and don't leave a big pile of sticks and leaves in the middle of the path. But the idea is, it's not so much about completing the task as about working for that period. And what often happens, I've found, and what you will probably find if you come to any of those retreats that I'm about to announce at the end of this video, is that the spaces that I'm going in Europe are kind of typical of a lot of spaces I've gone to do Zazen retreats, which means they're pretty clean already. So it can often feel like you've been assigned busy work, which, I always found that annoying, because I always hated getting those kind of busy work jobs when I was working. But you approach it with a different sort of mind. A busy work meaning they're just trying to keep you busy for a certain amount of time, and the task doesn't really need to be done, if people aren't familiar with that expression. So it's not like that, though. You're just trying to work for that period and do the work with the same sort of mindset that you do your Zazen. Now, I don't know. I actually tried to see if it was in any of the books that I have on my shelves, but I couldn't find it anywhere, about the history of the Samu period. So I'm going to make some assumptions here, but I think these assumptions are on solid ground. My guess is that the Samu period is sort of a way of reenacting what the early Zen monks had to do when Zen Buddhism of the Zen tradition started to become a thing in China. Because in India, there had been a tradition that monks would beg for their living. So they would be provided food by the community. They'd be provided money, too, by the community, so they could buy the things that they also needed in addition to food. But when Zen moved into China, they didn't have that tradition there. So monks had to learn to kind of fend for themselves, and a lot of monks became farmers. So the Indian tradition with Buddhist monks was, they were more or less forbidden to do work. They were supposed to be devoted entirely to their practice, but it became impossible to keep that kind of thing going in China, so they had to work. And these days things have changed, and there are different ways for communities to be able to make a living. And I don't know of any self-sustaining Buddhist communities these days. I mean, they might exist somewhere in Asia, I suppose. I don't think there's any in the West at all. I know that the original dream for Green Gulch Farm, which was part of the San Francisco Zen Center, was for it to be a self-sustaining Buddhist community where they grow their own food and stuff. But what they found out is that hippies who turned into Zen monks were not really good at being farmers, so that didn't work out. But they still farm up there, and I think they do raise a significant amount of their own produce that they feed themselves with, but certainly not all of it. So the Samu period, I've always assumed was a way of kind of reenacting that and kind of paying tribute to the way the monks used to live back then. And when it comes to work in general, one of my favorite quotations from Dogen appears in an essay called Four Elements of a Bodhisattva's Social Relations, which appears in volume 3 of the Nishijima Cross version of Shobo Genzo. And the line is this: "Earning a living and doing productive work are originally nothing other than free giving." So this essay by Dogen is about the 4 virtues of a Buddhist monk, one of which is dana, which means free giving and generosity. And I love the way that Dogen here characterizes even working for a living, providing for your family. This is the way Nishijima Roshi used to expand on this, because it says doing productive work, but it also means working for your family, working to provide for your family and yourself too. He characterizes those as originally free giving, which I think is true. I think human beings who are sort of, what do they call them? Communal animals. They're not pack animals. What do we call it in anthropology? I've forgotten anyway. Human beings are creatures who work cooperatively to kind of make a group, and that's how we survive. And I think part of our nature is that we want to work. This is an interesting thing, because I think a lot of us approach our work with a sort of resentment, like, I'm just doing this crappy job in order to make a living, and if I didn't have, if I didn't have to do this crappy job to make a living, I'd just sit around playing video games all day. But I think what you find with a lot of people who've maybe gotten themselves into situations where they can sort of sit around playing video games all day or whatever, is that most of us don't like it. Most of us kind of get antsy. Even people who sort of pretend to like that kind of thing, it kind of makes you weird after a while when you do that. I think people want to work, and this free giving is not just sort of an ideal that Buddhism is trying to impose upon us. It's trying to say that it is in our nature to give freely to each other, so we want to do that. So even working for a living, even earning a salary for your work, is part of that free giving. The salary is sort of, the karmic compensation. I hate to use terms like that, but it's sort of what happens when you do work, when you serve others, you get paid for it. So that works out nicely for everybody. And I think that's more natural than we think it is, that sort of exchange. I think we've artificialized it, and there's certain people in our community who really rail against that idea. But I think we want to do that, and I think we, in a kind of a deeper way, we need to do that in order to feel good about ourselves. Now, one of the best places you can find Dogen's attitude on this, on working, is in this little thing called Tenzo Kyokun, which is instructions for the cook. And this is the best translation I know of. This is, who did this? Kosho Uchiyama Roshi. I'm not sure who did the translation. He does the commentary. Who did the translation? Translated by Thomas Wright. There you go. So I don't know if this version is still in print, but it's called How to Cook Your Life. From the Zen Kitchen to Enlightenment, and it contains the text. But one of the things I wanted to mention just in passing is I have this book too, and this is the first one I pulled off my shelves because I'd forgotten what was in it. Instructions to the Cook. You would think that this book by Bernie Glassman and Rick Fields would contain Dogen's instructions for the cook, but it does not. So fair warning to anybody. I haven't read this for a long time, so I'm not really trying to say whether it's a good book or a bad book, but it doesn't contain a translation of Dogen's instructions for the cook, even though one might assume it does. Dogen's instructions for the cook is exactly what it purports to be. And it was kind of a lost piece of writing for a long time. I can't remember when it was first discovered, but it was rediscovered, I suppose, long after Dogen's death. And I think there was some dispute when it was originally discovered as to whether Dogen even wrote it. But now people have resolved that, and most people believe that Dogen actually wrote it. But one of the charming stories in here kind of relates to work in general, and that's one of the things I wanted to point out. Is this, even though this is instructions to the cook, the guy who cooks the meals at a Zen temple, who's called a Tenzo, it can be applied to lots of other kinds of work. And here's a story that Dogen tells in this book. When I was at Mount Tiantong, which is a place in China where he studied, where he met the person who would become his master, his ordaining teacher, his transmitting teacher, let's say, because ordaining and transmitting is a little different. But when I was at Mount Tiantong, a monk called Lu from King Yuan Fu was serving as Tenzo. Tenzo is cook, as I just said. One day after the noon meal, I was walking to another building within the complex when I noticed Lu drying mushrooms in the sun in front of the Butsuden. He carried a bamboo stick but had no hat on his head, which we can assume was bald, because they shave their heads. The sun's rays beat down so harshly that the tiles along the walk burned one's feet. Lu worked hard and was covered with sweat. I could not help but feel the work was too much of a strain for him. His back was a bow drawn taut. His long eyebrows were cane white. Crane white, sorry, I was like looking at this words. What's cane white? Crane white. White is a crane. Not a crane like lifting things, but a crane like the bird. I approached and asked his age. He replied that he was 68 years old. Then I went on to ask him why he never used any assistance. He answered, "Other people are not me." "You are right," I said. "I can see that your work is the activity of the Buddha Dharma, but why are you working so hard in this scorching sun?" He replied, "If I do not do it now, when else can I do it?" There was nothing else for me to say. As I walked on along that passageway, I began to sense inwardly the true significance of the role of Tenzo, and of work in general. And then he tells another mushroom story. I arrived in China in April 1223, but being unable to disembark immediately, I stayed aboard ship at the port of Ningbo. One day in May, while I was talking with the captain, an old monk about 60 years of age, he's old, I'm 61, anyway, came directly to the ship to buy mushrooms from the Japanese merchants on board. I should point out, Dogen is 23 at the time that this is happening. I invited him for tea and asked where he'd come from. He said he was the Tenzo at the monastery at Mount Ayuwang, and added, "I am originally from Shishu, although I left there over 40 years ago. I am 61 this year." Okay, same age as me. "And I have practiced in several Zen monasteries in this country. Last year, while living in Guion, I visited the monastery at Mount Awang, though I spent my time there totally confused as to what I was doing." And then he talks about how he was appointed Tenzo, and he says that tomorrow is May the 5th, but I have nothing special to offer the monks. I guess May the 5th is a holiday, was some sort of holiday. "I wanted to prepare a noodle soup, but I did not have any mushrooms to put in it, and I came here to buy some." And I asked, I being Dogen, in this story, "When did you leave Ayuwang?" He replied, "After lunch." "Is it far from here?" "About 14 miles. "When will you go back to the temple?" "I am planning to return as soon as I've bought the mushrooms." So Dogen says to this 61-year-old ancient man, "Look, dude, why don't you just hang out here, spend the night, and go back tomorrow?" And he says, "I've been put in charge of this work in my old age. It is, so to speak, the practice of an old man. How can I entrust all that work to others? Moreover, when I left the temple, I did not ask for permission to stay out overnight." So Dogen asks, "But why, when you are so old, do you do the hard work of a Tenzo, a cook? Why do you not spend your time practicing Zazen or working on the koans of former teachers?" Koans are, of course, those impossible question stories. "Is there something special to be gained working as a Tenzo?" And he burst out laughing, the old 61-year-old man. "My good friend from abroad, you do not yet understand what practice is all about. And Dogen feels ashamed, and he learns a lesson from this guy as to the meaning of true practice, which includes working. So there's long been kind of a debate, and this especially appears in some of Dogen's work, about whether one is truly a Zen monk if one also works. Because in some of the ancient traditions, as I mentioned earlier in this video, monks weren't even permitted to work. And then you get to China, and then finally in contemporary Zen in Japan, lots and lots of monks have outside jobs. So is it real monkdom if you're working? Now, my teacher, Nishijima Roshi, was very much into this sort of what they call lay practice, which means you are ordained just like a monk, but then you go back and you work in the real world. He thought that was very important. He really stressed that to his students, and he didn't want his students just becoming full-time monks. Other people have different views about that. I tend to appreciate my teacher's approach. Both of my teachers had that idea that you could do both. Dogen, as I sort of hinted at, is sort of, you can find both points of views in his writings. You can find in his writings this kind of idea that you don't have to be a full-time monk living in a monastery to get the full benefits, shall we say, of Zen practice. But you can find other parts of his writings where he says you have to be a full-time monk or you're never going to get it at all. You're no good. I tend to think that those later pieces where he's saying that you have to be a full-time monk were written more as encouragement to the people who were living the very hard life of full-time monks under Dogen's tutelage up in Eiheiji and the other monasteries where he served as the master. And not written as a kind of disparagement of those of us who do our Zen practice and do work in the secular world. I don't think he really changed his mind. Other people will differ, and I've done videos about this before, so I'm not going to go deeply into that. I just think that's something that should be mentioned in a video about working in Zen. And one of my most interesting sort of conversations with my own teacher about working in Zen was, as a lot of you who watch my videos know, I used to work for a company called Tsuburaya Productions, and pretty much the entire time I was in Japan I worked for them. And they were a company that made a TV show called Ultraman, a superhero show, much like the Power Rangers, which was basically started off as an imitation of Ultraman, but anyway, I was having some trouble in that company, and there were some difficulties going on there. And I remember saying to Nishijima Roshi, kind of just griping to him about the troubles in my company, that we had no direction. Our company had no goals. Well, the company itself may have had goals, but the office, the international office that I worked in, really was kind of goalless at the time. It had no idea what it wanted to do. And then I stopped myself and I said, well, I know in Zen you're not supposed to have a goal. And he said, well, yes, in Zazen you should have no goal, but if you're working in a business, you must have a goal. So I thought that was interesting that he made that clear distinction between the two parts of his life. And I say his life because he also worked for a company. He was working, most of the time I knew him, he worked for a soap and cosmetics company. Before that, he'd worked for the Japanese Ministry of Finance. I don't know if he was ever a full-time monk. If he was, he must have spent a short time there and then gone back to work. So there you go. That's the main things I wanted to say about work as Zen. If I haven't covered anything, please let me know. Send me a question at bw@hardcorezen.info, or you can put a comment. I read most of the comments until it becomes like too overwhelming. So I mentioned that I was going to tell you about the retreats I have planned for this year, so here they are. September 11th through 14th, I will be in Finland at the, what's it called? Oh my gosh, why am I blanking? You know, I'm having kidney stones right now, and they're hurting like heck, so it's scrambling my brains. I'll have Brad of the future tell you the name of the group in Finland, who I've been seeing for 12 years, and I'm just blanking on their name. So I'll be there. Kayo Zendo, that's it. Kayo Zendo. It has a meaning in Finnish which I've forgotten, but in Japanese, kajo, spelled the same way, means everyday living. Sorry, Brad of the future coming in here because Brad of the past said the wrong dates. September 17th through 21st, I will be at Benediktushof in Germany. September 23rd to 25th, there's a potential for some kind of events in Devon, England, but the folks there haven't gotten back to me for about a month, so I don't know what's going on there, so we'll see. And then September 27th through 30th, I will be in Hebden Bridge, England. So those are the retreats I have planned in Europe this year. All right. If you want to leave a donation for me to do more talks like this and get more medicine to cure my kidney stones, you can go to the URL that you're seeing on the screen below, which is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate. That's where you'll find links to my PayPal and Patreon accounts. Those are my main and usually my only ways of living, making a living, and doing productive work, as Dogen says. So I appreciate your support, but as always, you don't got to support me if you don't want to support me. All right, we will see you next time. Have a good time all the time. Bye. Hey Ziggy, what do you think? What do you think of the Flying V guitar? That's the right guitar to play a song by Rush on, don't you think? I think it would be good. I don't know if Alex Lifeson ever played a Flying V though. Anyway, let's go inside and edit the video, okay? All right, let's do that.